In this quiet space of Dreamtime Science, we turn down the volume of the universe to hear its subtlest secrets. Let's explore the cosmos at the perfect pace for peaceful contemplation. You know what's fascinating? I've been thinking a lot about those moments when a bunch of people remember something the same way, but then it turns out that memory doesn't quite match reality. It's like our minds are playing a gentle trick on us, or maybe there's something deeper going on beneath the surface of how we remember things. Tonight, I want to share some surprising ideas about these curious false memories and why they might feel like little glitches in the story our brains tell us. Should these dreamy explorations accompany your journey to sleep, a gentle like or subscription would be deeply appreciated. What questions about our universe keep you wonderfully curious? Before we begin, create your sanctuary. Nestle into your chosen spot. Let your muscles soften and allow your breath to find its natural rhythm. There is a peculiar sensation known to all who have lived long enough to see the world change beneath their feet, a subtle trembling in the fabric of recollection, a gentle shiver of disbelief when the past does not quite align with the stories we have carried inside us. Sometimes it is a word remembered differently, a colour in the wrong place, the death of a famous figure recalled years before it happened. Little things perhaps, but enough to make us pause, frown, and wonder if reality is as stable as we once believed. This sensation, collective yet deeply personal, is at the heart of what has come to be known as the Mandela effect, a phrase as enigmatic as the phenomenon it describes. The term was coined in 2009 by Fiona Broome, who discovered at a conference among amiable conversation that she was not alone in her memory that Nelson Mandela had died in prison in the 1980s. This was not a fleeting impression, but a vivid recollection, complete with broadcasts, mourning crowds, and the sense of a world changed by his passing. Yet, history tells us otherwise. Nelson Mandela, after long years of imprisonment, was released, became president of South Africa, and lived until 2013. Broome's surprise grew into fascination as she found others who shared her memory, as if an invisible thread had woven a tapestry of an alternate past across many minds. The Mandela effect is not an isolated quirk, but a widespread phenomenon, so common, in fact, that it is easy to find strangers who, without prompting, can recall the same false memory. These are not simple slips of the mind, not just the result of confusing one story for another. Rather, they are collective misrememberings, persistent and strangely detailed, shared by groups of people who have never met. And as we begin to pull at this thread, we find it entwined with the broader questions of how memory works, how the mind reconstructs the past, and how culture itself can shape and reshape what we believe to be true. It is a curious thing to discover that one's memory is not a perfect record, but a living, breathing creation, malleable, susceptible to influence, and in constant dialogue with the stories that surround us. Memory, after all, is not a file to be retrieved from a cabinet, nor a photograph to be taken out and examined. It is more like a tapestry, woven anew each time we remember, the threads of fact and fiction interlaced by emotion, suggestion, and the whispers of those around us. Consider for a moment the story that gave the Mandela effect its name. Imagine the prison on Robben Island, the cold stone walls and the long, slow years. Imagine the world watching, the news of Mandela's struggle echoing across continents, the movement that grew in his name. For some, the memory is clear. Mandela died in captivity, a martyr to the cause. They recall news reports, world leaders offering condolences, perhaps even the somber voice of a broadcaster announcing his passing. But the historical record is different. Mandela was freed, and his life after prison was as significant as the years he spent behind bars. How, then, does such a memory take hold? How can so many people, separated by distance and experience, share a recollection that never occurred? The Mandela effect is not limited to grand matters of history and politics. It seeps into the quieter corners of pop culture, where stories and images become part of the collective consciousness. One of the most famous examples is a line from the Star Wars saga, spoken in a darkened chamber between father and son. "Luke, I am your father," so many remember Darth Vader intoning, the words echoing through decades of parody, reference, and retelling. Yet the actual line is, "No, I am your father." The difference is subtle, almost trivial, but it is persistent. The misquote has become so embedded in popular culture that it eclipses the original, shaping even the memories of those who have seen the film many times. Another thread leads us to the world of children's literature, to a family of bears living in a treehouse. The Berenstain Bears, as they are known, have been a fixture of bedtime stories for generations, yet countless readers recall the name as the Berenstain Bears, with an E instead of an A. The Berenstain spelling feels so right, so familiar, that the actual covers of the books can seem like forgeries, mistakes in the printing process, or evidence of some deeper change in the world itself. There are countless other examples. Some remember a monocle on the face of the Monopoly Man, Mr. Monopoly, which he has never worn. The logo of the children's television show Looney Tunes is often misremembered as Looney Tunes. The colour of chartreuse, in the minds of many, is a shade of pink or red, rather than the yellow-green it has always been. These small errors, scattered across the landscape of memory, accumulate and intertwine, forming a map of the unconscious ways we shape and share our realities. Why do these collective misrememberings occur? There are many possible explanations, each one a thread in the larger tapestry. Some are rooted in the workings of memory itself, the way the brain stores, retrieves, and reconstructs information. Human memory is not a perfect record, but a dynamic process, prone to suggestion, distortion, and the blending of similar experiences. It is influenced by repetition, by the authority of others, and by the narratives that circulate through culture. When enough people share the same error, it can become self-reinforcing, a kind of folklore of the mind. But there is something more at play, a sense of wonder and unease that has captured the imagination of storytellers and philosophers alike. The Mandela effect feels, at times, like a glimpse into an alternate reality, a momentary tear in the fabric of the world. It is no coincidence that the phenomenon is often linked to the themes of science fiction, with its visions of parallel universes, simulated realities, and hidden machinery behind the scenes of everyday life. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, as the digital age blossomed and the boundaries between fact and fiction became ever more permeable, these themes found fertile ground. The Matrix, a film that has become shorthand for questioning the nature of reality itself, asks what would happen if everything we perceived was an elaborate simulation, a trick played on the senses by unseen architects. Within this framework, the Mandela effect becomes a tantalizing clue. What if, for a moment, we glimpsed the seams of the simulation, or slipped from one version of reality into another? This idea, though fantastical, resonates with a deep current in the human psyche. We are, after all, creatures of story. Our sense of self, our understanding of the world, is constructed from the tales we tell about our past, our families, our cultures, our possibilities. When the stories do not align, when the tapestry of memory reveals a knot or a loose thread, we are forced to confront the limits of our knowledge and the fragility of our certainties. The Mandela effect, then, is more than a curiosity of memory. It is a cultural phenomenon, a reflection of our collective anxieties and hopes. It raises questions about authority, about the nature of truth, and about the ways in which information is shared and preserved. In an age of information overload, as images and stories are replicated, remixed, and refracted across countless screens, the boundary between the real and the imagined grows ever thinner. We rely on each other to remember, to verify, to anchor ourselves in a shared reality. But what happens when the anchors shift and the bedrock of memory becomes sand? There is a quiet poetry in the persistence of these shared false memories. They are, in a sense, the myths of the modern age, little stories that reveal the workings of the mind and the shape of the culture that surrounds us. The memory of Mandela's death in prison is not just a mistake. It is a story about struggle and sacrifice, about the power of an individual to shape history. The misquoted lines from movies and the altered names of beloved characters are echoes of the ways in which stories are told and retold, each telling slightly different, shaped by the needs and desires of the moment. Science fiction, with its visions of alternate realities and simulated worlds, provides a language for exploring these mysteries. In the flickering light of the cinema or the quiet hours of reading, we are invited to imagine worlds where the past is mutable, where memory can be edited, erased, or rewritten. The Mandela effect becomes, in this context, a kind of portal, a doorway to questions that have no easy answers. The phenomenon also invites us to reflect on the relationship between individual and collective memory. We are not islands, but part of a vast archipelago of minds, connected by the currents of culture and communication. When enough people share the same memory, it takes on a life of its own, becoming a kind of parallel truth that coexists with the official record. It is a reminder that history is not only written in books, but carried in the minds and hearts of those who live it. There are those who find in the Mandela effect evidence of something uncanny, a glitch in the simulation, proof of parallel universes brushing against our own. These interpretations, while not supported by the mainstream scientific understanding of memory, capture the sense of wonder and disquiet that the phenomenon evokes. They speak to the enduring human desire to find meaning in the mysterious, to seek patterns even where none exist. Yet even as we marvel at the strangeness of these shared false memories, it is worth remembering that the mind itself is a marvel, capable of weaving together a world from fragments and whispers. The Mandela effect is a testament to the richness and complexity of human cognition, to the ways in which we are shaped by the stories we inherit and the stories we create. As we continue to trace the threads of this tapestry, we are drawn deeper into the labyrinth of memory, where every turn reveals new patterns and possibilities. The Mandela effect is not merely an oddity to be explained. It is an invitation to explore the mysteries of remembrance, to question what we know, and to wonder at the strange beauty of a world where reality and imagination are forever entwined. And so, with the tapestry unfurled before us, we find ourselves pausing at the edge of certainty, gazing into the spaces where memory falters and stories diverge. The journey ahead promises to be as winding as the corridors of the mind itself, with new questions blooming at every step, questions about how we remember, why we forget, and what it means to share our dreams and delusions with others. The next threads to follow will lead us further into the workings of memory, into the delicate machinery of the brain, and the endlessly fascinating landscape of the human mind. The tapestry is far from complete. Its patterns are only just beginning to emerge. Within the quiet chambers of your skull, beneath the fragile dome of bone and the gentle protection of skin and hair, lies a maze more intricate than any cathedral or city. It is a labyrinth not of stone, but of living cells and electric whispers, a shifting, breathing network that is the seat of memory, thought, and self. The brain, for all its soft vulnerability, is a marvel of complexity and mystery, and nowhere is this more evident than in the way it constructs and recalls the story of your life. Let us wander together slowly and with deliberate curiosity through the winding corridors of this labyrinth of the mind. let us illuminate with the soft glow of science, the strange architecture of memory, those fleeting moments of clarity and the shadows where certainty dissolves. Each memory you possess, every recollection that rises unbidden or is coaxed forth with effort, is not a simple playback of events. The mind does not archive your days as a camera would, capturing an unbroken stream of reality. Instead, memory is sculpted layer by layer from perception, emotion, and meaning. It is a living process, fluid and mutable, shaped as much by what you feel and believe as by what you witness. When an experience unfolds, a laughter shared, a word spoken, a glance exchanged, a cascade of activity begins deep within your brain. Sensory information, filtered through eyes, ears, skin, and tongue, converges in regions dedicated to making sense of the world. The hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure nestled in the temporal lobe, is the architect of new memories, binding together the disparate threads of experience into something coherent. There, fleeting impressions are woven into short-term memory. With time and repetition, and sometimes with the alchemy of emotion, these impressions are transformed, stabilized, and finally etched into the vast storehouse of long-term memory. But what is it really to remember? When you summon an image from the past, a childhood bedroom, the scent of rain on warm asphalt, the sound of a loved one's voice, your brain is not retrieving a pristine, untouched recording. Rather, it is reconstructing, piece by piece, an experience that once was. Each act of remembering is a creative act. The neurons that encode your memory fire together in patterns reminiscent of the original event, but never quite identical. The more often you recollect a moment, the more opportunities there are for subtle changes, for details to warp or fade, for shadows of suggestion to creep in. This is the paradox that lies at the heart of memory. It feels so real, so certain, and yet it is always, in some way, a fiction. The mind's labyrinth is alive, its walls pliable, its pathways shifting with every footstep. Consider for a moment the vividness of a cherished memory. Perhaps you can close your eyes and see, in exquisite detail, the face of a friend long gone. You might recall the color of their shirt, the shape of their smile, the exact words they spoke. Yet if you were to compare your memory with a photograph, or with the memories of others present at the time, subtle discrepancies would emerge. The shirt was not blue, but green. The smile was softer, the words slightly different. These are not failures of the brain, but rather glimpses into its remarkable flexibility. Memory is not an archive, but a story, rewritten anew with every telling. It is in this endless act of reconstruction that the seeds of suggestion and influence find fertile ground. The mind, for all its brilliance, is susceptible to the quiet nudges of others, to the gentle power of questions, to the unspoken expectations that flow through language and social interaction. Imagine a scene in which a witness to an event, a car accident perhaps, or a simple gathering, recalls what they saw. If an interviewer asks, "Did you see the broken headlight?" rather than, "Did you see a broken headlight?" the mere presence of the word "the" presumes its existence. The mind, eager to please, eager to make sense, may incorporate this suggestion into its reconstructed memory. In the classic experiments of Elizabeth Loftus and her colleagues, such subtle shifts in questioning were shown to alter not only what people reported, but what they genuinely remembered. The witness, convinced by the authority of their own recollection, would insist upon details that had never been present. This phenomenon is not limited to the courtroom or the laboratory. It is woven into the fabric of everyday life. When we share stories with friends, when we recall events in the presence of others, our memories intermingle. We borrow and lend details, we embellish and simplify, often without any awareness of the process. Each telling is an act of social negotiation, a dance between individual experience and collective narrative. The susceptibility of memory to suggestion is not a flaw, but rather a consequence of its adaptive power. The brain evolved not to be a perfect recorder, but to be a flexible interpreter, able to integrate new information and adapt to changing circumstances. This plasticity is the source of our creativity, our capacity for empathy, our ability to learn. It is also, inevitably, the source of our errors. False memories, those recollections of things that never happened, or happened differently than we believe, are a testament to the mind's imaginative prowess. They arise from the same mechanisms that allow us to dream, to imagine, to anticipate, and to learn from the experiences of others. Sometimes the boundary between memory and imagination is porous. A vivid dream, a compelling story, a well-placed suggestion can all become entwined with the narrative of our past, indistinguishable from reality. The process unfolds subtly, often invisibly. When you imagine an event in rich detail, the same neural circuits that would fire during the actual experience are activated, albeit less intensely. Over time, the distinction between what was imagined and what was lived can blur. If the imagined event is repeated, discussed, or emotionally charged, it may become anchored in long-term memory, indistinguishable from authentic experience. The social dimension of memory is equally profound. Human beings are, by nature, social creatures. Our minds are shaped not in isolation, but in conversation, in community, in the continual exchange of stories and perspectives. The memories we hold are often those that have been rehearsed and reinforced in the presence of others. Sometimes consensus gives rise to conviction, and what a group believes to have happened becomes, for its members, a shared reality, even if it is at odds with the objective record. This phenomenon, known as collective memory, is the glue that binds cultures and communities, but it is also the soil from which collective false memories, so-called mandela effects, can sprout. Consider the feeling of certainty that often accompanies memory, the sensation that I know what I saw, that I remember it perfectly. This confidence is a double-edged sword. It gives us faith in our experiences, but it can also blind us to the possibility of error. In the courtroom, eyewitness testimony is prized for its emotional impact, yet study after study reveals its fallibility. Even under the best conditions, memory is fragile. Stress, distraction, and the passage of time all conspire to erode and reshape the details. The brain's architecture of memory is not uniform. Different types of memories, facts, skills, emotions, are stored and retrieved by different systems. Declarative memory, the conscious recall of facts and events, relies heavily on the hippocampus and associated structures. Procedural memory, the knowledge of how to perform tasks, is etched into the basal ganglia and cerebellum. Emotional memory, those echoes of fear or joy, are inseparable from the amygdala. Each system has its own vulnerabilities, its own tendencies to fade or distort. For most of us, the mutability of memory is a gentle phenomenon, an occasional misremembered name, a lost detail, a story that grows in the telling. But in certain circumstances, the labyrinth becomes treacherous. Traumatic memories can be fragmented, suppressed, or altered by the mind's attempt to protect itself. Therapeutic interventions, though well-intentioned, can sometimes lead to the creation of memories that feel no less real for being untrue. The history of psychology is marked by cautionary tales of recovered memories that shattered lives, of suggestible minds led astray. It is a reminder of the delicate balance between healing and harm, between truth and belief. Yet amidst all this uncertainty, there is beauty in the labyrinth. The very processes that give rise to error also give rise to insight. The flexibility of memory allows us to reinterpret the past, to find new meaning, to forgive, to grow. It is the engine of learning and the foundation of identity. Without the capacity to reshape our memories, we would be trapped in a static world, unable to adapt to new truths or to imagine new possibilities. The limits of our understanding are not a cause for despair, but a call to humility. The more we learn about the mind, the more we appreciate its mysteries. Each advance in neuroscience, each clever experiment, illuminates another corner of the labyrinth, but the center always recedes into shadow. We know, for example, that the act of remembering changes the memory itself, a phenomenon known as reconsolidation. When a memory is recalled, it becomes temporarily malleable, susceptible to change before it is stored once again. This discovery has opened new avenues for therapeutic intervention, but it also underscores the dynamic nature of the mind. Consider, too, the phenomenon of déjà vu, that eerie sensation of familiarity in a situation that is objectively new. Neuroscience suggests that it may arise from a brief misfiring in the brain's memory circuits, a transient overlap between the processes of perception and recollection. In that moment, the labyrinth folds back upon itself, and the present is haunted by the ghost of memory. Memory is also shaped by emotion. Events that provoke strong feelings, joy, fear, anger, are remembered with greater clarity, as if seared into the fabric of the mind. The amygdala, in concert with the hippocampus, tags these memories as significant, prioritizing them for storage. Yet, even here, the story is not straightforward. Traumatic events can lead to memories that are vivid yet fragmented, or in some cases suppressed altogether. The mind's protective instincts can both preserve and obscure. As we drift deeper into the labyrinth, we find that the boundaries between reality and belief are not always clear. The mind constructs meaning from chaos, weaving together the threads of sensation, emotion, and narrative. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are, where we come from, and what we have experienced are both anchors and sails, grounding us in the past, yet propelling us toward the future. And so, as you lay in the quiet dark, listening to the slow rhythm of your own breathing, consider the marvel of your own mind. Each thought, each memory, each dream is a step along the winding path. The labyrinth is vast, its walls ever shifting, its mysteries both humbling and profound. The journey through it is never quite finished, for with each new experience, each new encounter, the maze expands and the story unfolds. Somewhere ahead, the soft glow of curiosity beckons, inviting us to look deeper still, into the spaces between memory and imagination, into the subtle interplay of brain and self, into the heart of what it means to remember. The labyrinth of the mind awaits, ever open, ever mysterious, and we walk its corridors together, step by patient step, toward wonders yet unseen. Settle deeper now, as the world outside fades, and the hush of the night grows thick and gentle. The mind, that intricate, pulsing weave of thought and memory, beckons us inward. We find ourselves standing at the threshold of a vast and elaborate labyrinth, the neural network of the human brain, a living map where memories are woven, tangled, and sometimes lost. This is a journey not of footsteps, but of ideas, an exploration of the tools, stories, and revelations that have shaped our understanding of memory and the mysterious organ that carries it. For centuries, the brain was shrouded in enigma, its secrets locked tight behind the fortress of the skull. Early thinkers could only guess at the machinery within, likening the brain to wax tablets, aqueducts, or clockwork, depending on the metaphors of their age. But as dawn slowly broke over the sciences, pioneers set out to chart its territories. Some navigated its shadowy corridors with the compass of introspection, others with the scalpel and microscope. All sought the same elusive prize, to map the seat of memory, that most intimate and essential of human powers. Let us travel back to one of the earliest chambers of this labyrinth, a dim-lit study lined with books, where a Viennese physician reclines in his armchair. Sigmund Freud, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, probed the recesses of the mind not with wires or machines, but with conversation. His method, psychoanalysis, was a journey through memory's hidden passageways, guided by the currents of free association and the hints of dreams. Freud believed that forgotten or repressed memories, especially those tinged with emotional pain, could shape the psyche from below the surface, like roots twisting beneath a garden. In Freud's accounts, memory was not a fixed ledger, but a living, shifting thing. His patients would speak, sometimes haltingly, of childhood events, traumas, and desires, and Freud would listen for echoes and patterns, interpreting slips of the tongue and layers of meaning. Through this process, he hoped to unearth memories that the conscious mind had buried, to bring the past into the light, and thereby heal the present. Though psychoanalysis now stands as a historical artifact, many of its core questions endure. How much of what we remember is shaped by our feelings, our wishes, our attempts to make sense of ourselves? Can memory deceive us, even as it defines us? Freud's methods, though groundbreaking for their time, were limited by subjectivity. The stories his patients told could not be weighed or measured. The mind's inner workings remained invisible, their mechanisms inferred only from words and emotions. As the 20th century advanced, new explorers entered the labyrinth with different tools in hand. The rise of cognitive psychology brought a shift from introspection to experimentation, from the couch to the laboratory. Consider now the sterile hush of a mid-century psychology lab, white walls, clipboards, and the quiet rustle of notepaper. Here, researchers sought to study memory not through deep dives into individual histories, but through carefully designed experiments. The subjects might be asked to memorize lists of words, to recall shapes or stories, to repeat numbers backwards or forwards. Through such tasks, psychologists began to glimpse the architecture of memory, its capacity, its limitations, its quirks. One of the most illuminating figures in this era was Hermann Ebbinghaus, who in the late 19th century embarked on an extraordinary experiment, using himself as the sole subject. Ebbinghaus crafted long lists of nonsense syllables, such as ZT or MUP, and then tested how well he could memorize and recall them over varying intervals. Through painstaking repetition and meticulous record-keeping, he charted the forgetting curve, a mathematical description of how quickly memories fade, if not reinforced. His work revealed that memory was not a static vault, but a dynamic process, vulnerable to the passage of time, yet strengthened by rehearsal and repetition. Other researchers probed the boundaries and fragilities of memory's machinery. In the 1950s and 60s, the American psychologist George Miller investigated the limits of short-term memory, concluding that the magic number 7, plus or minus 2, defined the number of items most people could hold in mind at once. This concept gave rise to the notion of working memory, the mental scratch pad where we juggle information in the moment, a phone number, a shopping list, the plot of a story. Memory, it became clear, was not a single monolith, but a suite of systems, each with its own rules and vulnerabilities. As experimental psychology flourished, new questions emerged. How reliable is memory? Can it be altered, even fabricated by suggestion or misinformation? In the late 20th century, a bold and unsettling experiment brought these questions into sharp relief. Enter the work of Elizabeth Loftus, whose studies would shake the foundations of legal testimony and personal history alike. Picture a modest office, crowded with files and the low hum of anxious anticipation. Here, Loftus invited ordinary volunteers to participate in a study about childhood memories. Unbeknownst to them, her collaborators, family members, had provided accounts of real events, but also a single fabricated tale, being lost in a shopping mall as a child. Over several interviews, some participants came to remember the invented episode in vivid detail, describing what they saw, felt, or how they were found, even though the event had never happened. Loftus's Lost in the Mall study revealed the astonishing malleability of memory. Not only could people forget real events, but they could also conjure up detailed recollections of things that never occurred, if prompted by suggestion, authority, or the expectation that such a memory ought to exist. Her work rippled through courtrooms and public consciousness, underscoring the dangers of relying on eyewitness testimony or recovered memories in the absence of supporting evidence. The implications were profound. If memory could be so easily shaped and reshaped, what did this mean for our sense of self, for the stories we tell about our lives? Memory, it seemed, was not a flawless recording, but a living narrative, constantly edited and revised by the mind's unseen hand. Yet even as psychologists charted the contours of memory's fallibility, the neuroscientific revolution was gathering force. Advances in technology provided new keys to the labyrinth, allowing researchers to peer into the living brain itself. Where once the mind's machinery was hidden, now it could be glimpsed in pulses of electricity and flickers of light. The first such glimpses came from the study of patients with brain injuries. In the 1950s, Brenda Milner and her colleagues worked with a man known to history only as HM, whose hippocampi had been surgically removed to treat severe epilepsy. Though his intelligence and personality remained intact, HM could no longer form new long-term memories. He could remember his childhood, but each day's events vanished soon after they occurred. Through his case, scientists deduced that the hippocampus was crucial for the formation of new memories, though not for the storage of old ones. With each new case, each stroke, tumor, or lesion, researchers mapped the functions of different brain regions: the hippocampus for encoding new experiences, the amygdala for emotional coloring, the prefrontal cortex for organization and retrieval. But these were rough maps, marked by the scars of injury. To see the brain in action, alive and thinking, would require new inventions. In the closing decades of the 20th century, such inventions arrived. Electroencephalography, or EEG, allowed scientists to record the brain's electrical activity through electrodes placed on the scalp. With its squiggling lines and rhythmic pulses, EEG revealed the symphony of neural oscillations that accompany thought, memory, and sleep. But its view was blurred, unable to pinpoint the sources of activity deep within the brain. Then came the era of imaging, positron emission tomography, PET, which traced the flow of radioactive tracers through the brain's metabolic pathways. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, which mapped the dance of oxygenated blood through neural tissues as people remembered words, solved puzzles, or relived emotional moments. In glowing false color images, the living brain was revealed as a landscape of shifting patterns, with regions lighting up in response to tasks, emotions, or recollections. Through these windows, neuroscientists began to see how memories are encoded and retrieved, a process not confined to a single memory center, but distributed across networks that span the cortex and subcortex, linking sights, sounds, emotions, and meanings. Remembering a childhood birthday, for example, might activate visual areas that store the image of the cake, auditory regions that recall the sound of laughter, and emotional circuits that replay the thrill of anticipation. The tools of modern neuroscience are ever more refined. Magnetoencephalography, MEG, can trace the brain's magnetic fields with millisecond precision. Optogenetics in animal models allows researchers to turn specific neurons on or off with flashes of light, observing the effects on behavior and memory. Even in humans, non-invasive stimulation techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, can modulate activity in targeted brain regions, offering new ways to probe the links between structure and function. Meanwhile, vast datasets of neural recordings are parsed by artificial intelligence, seeking patterns that elude the naked eye. Computational models strive to mimic the brain's mechanisms, from synaptic plasticity, the strengthening and weakening of connections, to the emergence of large-scale networks that underlie consciousness and selfhood. Yet for all these advances, the deepest mysteries remain. Why do certain memories persist with crystalline clarity, while others dissolve into vagueness? How are the contents of memory selected, reshaped, or lost? What is the boundary between remembering and imagining? The journey through the neural network is a journey through wonder and humility. Each new tool opens a door, yet reveals further corridors beyond. Memory, that silent architect of identity, remains both familiar and strange, a flickering trace in the living tissue of the brain, shaped by biology, experience, and the stories we tell ourselves. And so, as the night deepens and the hum of thought grows soft, let us drift farther into the labyrinth. The tools of science have shown us the outlines of memory's machinery, its fragility, its marvels. But another set of questions beckons. How do these neural traces add up to the sense of a self, to the continuity of consciousness that endures through time? In that twilight where memory meets identity, the journey continues. There is a hush that settles over the landscape of the mind as we turn now, at last, to gaze through the shimmering veil between memory and reality. The Mandela effect, with its curious catalogue of shared misremembrances, has carried us through the corridors of cognition, across the maps of neurology and the archives of personal recollection. Yet, as the lights of science flicker and fade into the long dusk of speculation, we find ourselves standing at the threshold of something more elusive, more profound. Here, the Mandela effect ceases to be merely a quirk of memory or a puzzle for psychologists. It becomes a whisper about the nature of consciousness itself, a mystery that unites us in our confusion and our wonder as members of a single, dreaming species. Consider for a moment the strange comfort that blooms from the discovery that your false memory is not yours alone. The realization that thousands, perhaps millions of strangers share your recollection of the Berenstain Bears as Berenstein, or remember a monocle perched upon the Monopoly man's nose, can be oddly reassuring. There is laughter sometimes in the realization of mutual error, but there is also a sense of kinship, as if the boundaries of self blur and we find ourselves woven into a larger tapestry. Each thread is a mind, and the Mandela effect is a pattern stitched across many, a motif that emerges not from one loom, but from the collective hum of countless weavers. This collective memory, this shared hallucination, if you like, is a peculiar bond. It suggests that reality, as we experience it, is not merely an external sequence of events, but something co-created, negotiated, and maintained by the minds that observe it. The philosopher's question, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound, finds new resonance here. If millions remember Looney Tunes as Looney Tunes, does a part of the world become for a fleeting moment tunes instead of tunes? The Mandela effect teases us with the idea that reality is not a fixed stage, but a play enacted by the agreement, sometimes the misagreement, of its audience. Let us dwell, then, on the nature of this agreement. Human beings are, at their core, social creatures. We crave connection, and memory is one of the bridges we build to span the chasm between isolated minds. In conversation, in shared laughter over half-remembered television jingles, in the telling and retelling of family stories, we are constantly negotiating reality. We are calibrating our personal timelines against the timelines of others, smoothing out the contradictions where we can, accommodating differences where we must. This process is not perfect. It is, in truth, riddled with errors and omissions, moments where the puzzle pieces just will not fit. And yet, it is this very imperfection that makes us human. The Mandela effect is a symptom of this ongoing negotiation. It is the ghostly residue of countless conversations, the echo of stories told and retold, each time reshaped by the teller's intent and the listener's expectation. For memory is not a static archive, a vault of unchanging facts. Rather, it is a living process, an act of constant construction and reconstruction. Each time we remember, we are not retrieving a pristine recording, but reenacting a moment, colouring it anew with the brushstrokes of our emotions, our current beliefs, and, crucially, the memories of those around us. The philosopher Maurice Halbwachs, pondering the nature of memory in the early 20th century, coined the phrase collective memory. He argued that what we remember is shaped profoundly by the social groups to which we belong, our families, our schools, our nations. When we recall, we do so as members of a community, drawing on the shared symbols, language, and narratives that bind us together. The Mandela effect, in this light, is not merely a collection of mistakes, but a living testament to the power of collective memory to shape the contours of our reality. Pause for a moment and reflect on what this means. If our memories are so deeply entangled with those of others, then our sense of self, our very identity, is, in a sense, a communal project. The stories we tell about ourselves, the moments we believe define us, are woven from threads spun not just by our own experience, but by the experiences of those around us. When a group misremembers a detail from a children's book or a film, it is not only an error. It is a subtle act of community, an unconscious agreement to see the world a certain way, if only for a moment. This is not to say that reality is wholly subjective, a shifting sea with no anchors. There are, of course, external facts, historical dates, published texts, the stubborn evidence of the physical world. Yet the Mandela effect reminds us that our access to these facts is always mediated through memory, and memory is a mercurial companion. It can be shaped by suggestion, by repetition, by the gravitational pull of consensus. When enough people recall a thing a certain way, the weight of their collective certainty can, for a time, tip the balance of what feels real. There is a gentleness, almost a tenderness, in this shared fallibility. The Mandela effect invites us to look upon our mistakes not with scorn, but with curiosity and empathy. Each misremembered lyric or logo is a window into the workings of the group mind, a signpost pointing toward the invisible threads that unite us. In a world that often seems fractured and divisive, the Mandela effect offers a peculiar solace. In our errors we are together, in our confusion we are kin. But there is another, deeper mystery here, one that touches upon the very foundations of consciousness. What does it mean that a memory can exist, not in a single mind, but in thousands? Is there, in some ineffable sense, a collective consciousness, a field of awareness that transcends the individual, binding us into something greater than ourselves? Scientists, for the most part, are wary of such notions, preferring to speak of social contagion or cognitive biases. Yet the intuition persists, flickering at the edges of thought. Perhaps our minds are not so separate after all. There have been, across the centuries, many attempts to articulate the idea of collective consciousness. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, a reservoir of shared images and archetypes underlying all human thought. In his view, the minds of individuals are islands rising from a single vast sea. Modern neuroscience, too, has begun to map the ways in which our brains synchronize with those of others, mirroring gestures, emotions, and even patterns of thought. When we converse, when we laugh together, when we reminisce, our neural rhythms align, creating moments of genuine connection that blur the line between self and other. The Mandela effect, then, can be seen as a ripple upon this ocean, a fleeting alignment, a moment when many minds, shaped by similar experiences and influences, settle upon the same false shore. In this light, the phenomenon is not merely a curiosity, but a clue, a sign that our consciousness is, at least in part, a shared endeavour. The boundaries between self and other are porous, and through the latticework of language, story, and memory, something larger than the individual mind emerges. Yet, for all our yearning to be connected, there is also an ache that comes with these shared misremembrances, a poignant reminder of the fragility of memory and the uncertainty of reality. If we can be so easily mistaken, if our most cherished recollections can be so thoroughly contradicted by evidence, then what anchors us? Where does the self reside, if not in the story of our own past? The Mandela effect is, in this sense, both a celebration and a lamentation. It unites us in our fallibility, even as it unsettles the foundations of our identity. Perhaps, though, this is not cause for despair, but for humility. To be human is to live in the space between certainty and doubt, to inhabit a world shaped both by the stubborn facts of matter and the shifting sands of memory. The Mandela effect is a gentle reminder that our knowledge is always provisional, our stories always in flux. It invites us to hold our memories lightly, to cherish the beauty of shared confusion, and to remain open to the possibility that there is more to reality than meets the eye. Consider how memory, this fragile and fallible faculty, is nonetheless the foundation of our consciousness. Without memory, there can be no continuity of self, no story to tell. Each day we awaken into the world as the sum of all our yesterdays, our hopes and fears, our triumphs and regrets, the countless small details that compose the narrative of a life. And yet, as the Mandela effect reveals, this narrative is never wholly our own. It is shaped, sculpted, and sustained by the memories of others, by the stories we inherit, the words we share, the histories we write together. In the end, perhaps the greatest lesson of the Mandela effect is not about the unreliability of memory, but about the profound interconnectedness of human experience. When we gather, in online forums or around kitchen tables, to compare recollections and puzzle over contradictions, we are participating in a ritual as old as language itself. We are seeking, through the medium of memory, to touch the minds of others, to find our place within the great unfolding story of humanity. And so, as dusk deepens and the world grows quiet, let us linger a while longer in the mystery of our collective consciousness. Let us marvel at the improbable harmony of misremembered cartoons and misquoted lines, at the invisible threads that tie us to strangers across continents and centuries. The Mandela effect, with all its quirks and riddles, is not simply a curiosity to be explained away, but a mirror held up to the shimmering, ever-shifting landscape of the mind. Somewhere, perhaps, there is still a version of the world where Mandela died in the 1980s, where the bears are spelled with an E, where the Monopoly man dons his monocle with pride. These are the worlds we carry within us, the infinite branching paths of memory, the parallel universes of shared belief. We walk together in the twilight between fact and fiction, sustained by the hope that, in our confusion, we might find not only answers but each other. And as we close our eyes and drift towards sleep, the boundaries between self and other, between memory and reality, begin to blur. The stories we have told and the ones we have yet to tell mingle in the darkness, weaving new patterns in the tapestry of the collective mind. In the silence, we sense the presence of countless others, dreamers, thinkers, rememberers, each holding a small piece of the puzzle, each adding their voice to the ongoing song of what it means to be human. In this gentle intermingling of memory and imagination, of certainty and mystery, we surrender to the vastness of our shared consciousness, trusting that whatever the truth may be, we are not alone in seeking it. The Mandela effect, in its strange and wondrous way, reminds us that reality is not merely what we remember, but what we remember together, and that in this remembering we are bound, one to another, by the fragile, luminous thread of the human mind. And so, our journey through the shimmering veils of the Mandela effect gently drifts to a close, like a comet tail fading into the hush of space. As you rest beneath the quiet stars of thought, may the mysteries of memory and time softly ripple through your dreams. Return soon, dear traveller, for more Dreamtime tales that softly weave the wonders of our curious cosmos.